I hope you've all had an amazing day of science and talking so far. It's a real pleasure to welcome everybody here for this panel, this special panel, Brain at 10, Building on a Decade of Innovation. I'm hoping we'll have a really fun conversation and questions afterwards to see how we can dream about what the next 10 years and beyond will look like. Before I introduce the panelists, this great group of folks here, I just want to acknowledge why we're here today. So it was about a decade ago. In fact, I remember it was the Tuesday after Easter in 2013, because some of us got this mysterious email from the White House saying, please come to see President Obama. He has a very exciting announcement. They didn't say what it was, but they wanted my social security number, which is kind of scary. I thought I was being punked. It was Good Friday, and it was very hard to find somebody, but I did, and it was just a momentous occasion. And Dr. Francis Collins, who was then director of the NIH, together with President Obama, announced this Brain Research through Advancing Innovative Neurotechnology initiative, focused on mapping the human brain, the final frontier, the most amazing frontier in science that I can think about. So we have a pretty cool video from that morning. If we can put it up for a moment, that'd be kind of fun.
Announcing today this first wave of NIH investments in support of the project called BRAIN, which of course is an acronym. We are the government. BRAIN stands for Brain Research through Advancing Innovative Neurotechnologies.
Imagine if no family had to feel helpless watching a loved one disappear behind the mask of Parkinson's or struggle in the grip of epilepsy. Imagine if we could reverse traumatic brain injury or PTSD for our veterans who are coming home. That's who we are. That's why this BRAIN initiative is so important.
These awards will support more than 100 investigators who are going to develop transformative technologies that will accelerate fundamental understanding of the brain. NIH has made tremendous strides to take what is an audacious initiative and put a vision and a framework to help us achieve that.
There's this enormous mystery waiting to be unlocked. And the BRAIN initiative will change that by giving scientists the tools they need to get a dynamic picture of the brain in action and better understand how we think and how we learn and how we remember.
And there we have it. And what I really recall and stuck with me from 10 years ago was President Obama's final call to action was, let's get to work. And get to work we did because of all of you folks here in the audience. It's been an amazing 10 years of science, innovation, and impacts in the clinic. We have a lot of people to thank for this, all the great folks who've worked on it out in the field, all the amazing staff at NIH, the vision that they had, as well as the great support we've had on the Hill from our friends in Congress. We've had great bipartisan support from the Congressional Neuroscience Caucus in the House. The Congressional Neuroscience Caucus is co-chaired by Congressman Earl Blumenauer from Portland, Oregon, and Congressman Morgan Luttrell from the Houston area. And I just want to show you for a moment, Representative Blumenauer was kind enough to send us a video giving his thoughts on all that we've accomplished with their amazing support, and I think for the vision for the future. So if we can roll that video, that'd be great.
I'm delighted to celebrate 10 years of the BRAIN Initiative. I'm proud to have championed this important program in Congress. The work the BRAIN Initiative has funded will have impacts for decades to come, but we know there's still a lot of work to do. Neuroscience has an impact on every aspect of the lives of American citizens. Every family is affected by brain issues. Over a third of the population has some sort of neurological challenge. Neuroscience, addiction, Alzheimer's, baby boomers aging, all are a huge contributor to health spending. Neurological conditions cost the country nearly $1.5 trillion each year. But we know that focusing on brain health can make a difference. When I founded the Congressional Neuroscience Caucus 13 years ago, I was struck that despite promising research, neuroscience didn't have any major breakthroughs comparable to cardiovascular health or cancer. It was clear that we needed to mobilize efforts to broaden awareness, redouble research, and gain the political support to achieve breakthroughs. In the 13 years since we founded the caucus, we have held more than 50 briefings on Capitol Hill and events including many focusing on the BRAIN Initiative. This BRAIN Initiative is doing fundamental work creating building blocks for long-term research. I know that funding can be a challenge, but I'm committed to continuing this fight this year. Now is the time to refocus and redouble our efforts. Since 2014, the BRAIN Initiative has invested more than $3 billion for more than 1,300 projects. I've been excited by the work like mapping the human brain, recording brain activity for chronic pain, and helping regain mobility in stroke patients. These are just a few of the examples of what difference this is making. No area of federal investment and research holds greater promise for transforming lives or revolutionary healthcare. This is an area that brings people together rather than divides them, and I'm grateful for our partnership.
So I think this speaks to the great support we have on the Hill, bipartisan support for all the great work that you all are doing. And again, just really want to thank Congressman Blumenauer and Congressman Luttrell and all their colleagues on the Congressional Earth Science Caucus, as well as all their colleagues in the House and Senate for the great support they've given us over the years. So here we are 10 years later. We had an intentional strategy for conducting open, ethical, and collaborative science, and there's a lot to show for it. And what we're going to have here today is, I hope, really dynamic discussion with this august panel, which includes Dr. Francis Collins here, who is currently science advisor to President Joe Biden, and as I mentioned before, has been a key force in making the BRAIN Initiative happen, and eventually championed the effort that got us the attention of the White House and ultimately funding. Doctors Corey Bargman and Bill Newsom were, I think I could say, the original architects of the BRAIN Initiative. They co-chaired a working group of Dr. Collins' advisory committee to the director to lay out a vision for what this thing might look like, and I think we're going to hear from them about the process of that. They came up together with this working group, the so-called BRAIN 2025 report, which laid out a vision for the first 10 years of the initiative, and it really was a great document. We referred back to it a lot. I refer to this as the Old Testament. In 2019, there was a second set of reports made, the so-called BRAIN 2.0 reports, that looked at what we had accomplished and looked ahead for the next coming years. So we'll talk about that a bit with Corey and Bill. Corey is Professor and Vice President of Academic Affairs at the Rockefeller University. She also did a little side gig heading up the Chan Zuckerberg Science Initiative, whose mission was really to cure us all of, or at least our children or grandchildren, of all diseases by the end of the century, is it, Corey, or so? And so she really has been quite an innovator in her own right, but also has a great vision for what we can do if we put our minds to it. Dr. Bill Newsom is the Harmon Family Professor of Neurobiology and the founding director of the Wu Tsai Neuroscience Institute at Stanford University, and has really made a lot of amazing contributions to the field of systems neuroscience that we hope to build on with the BRAIN Initiative. And then we have also with us Dr. Caroline Montojo. She's currently the president and CEO of the Dana Foundation, and she's been responsible for a major pivot of the foundation's interest in looking at the relationship between neuroscience and society. And prior to that, she was at the Kavli Foundation for many years, and the Kavli Foundation, as I think we'll talk about, played an instrumental role in the genesis of the BRAIN Initiative. And last but not least, Dr. Eddie Chang from UCSF. He is the professor and chair of the Department of Neurosurgery. And I think if you were at any of the sessions earlier today, you would have seen some of this groundbreaking research in many, many different domains. So join me in welcoming this group here, and we'll start off on the conversation. So, I guess the first question I have would be for Francis, Corey, and Bill. I guess I could sum it up with, what were you thinking? What was the thought process in the conception of this, what became this amazing initiative? It started out kind of small, right? $40 million initially, $46 million invested incredibly well. But what were you thinking? What was behind it, and how did this thing evolve in your minds?
So this is the origin story part of our panel discussion, I guess. So I became NIH director in August of 2009, serving under Barack Obama, who was a president who had intense interest in science and medicine, although he would be the first to say he didn't have training in that space, and he often made fun of his own grades in physics. But I suspect lots of people in this room could make fun of their grades in physics and are still doing great science. Anyway, he was intensely interested in what are the kinds of things that maybe we could be doing that are not moving as rapidly as they could. And that was part of my charge, is to sort of survey the landscape. Not being a neuroscientist, I was intrigued but not very well informed about what the possibilities might be. I remembered the era of the 1990s, which was the decade of the brain, which got people excited about what might be done in neuroscience, but the tools were not really as mature at that point to be able to look back after that decade and say, wow, look, we really changed everything. It was still a pretty hard struggle. But it seemed like things were happening in that space. I do want to give a shout out to Kavli Foundation, because they were very interested in trying to stir up some ideas about something a bit more targeted and a bit bolder. And I think they had a meeting in London, maybe it was in 2011, which had sort of at the end of it this idea of maybe we need a genome project kind of holy grail approach to understanding the brain. And that got some buzz going. And certainly meeting with Myung Chun and others at Kavli, I was getting some excitement about that idea. But it sort of seemed like, okay, if that idea is going to take wing, it really has to be anchored in the funding agencies that maybe have the resources to make it happen. And that was not just NIH, NSF and DARPA were also involved. And there was international interest. But just as with the Genome Project, if NIH wasn't going to be in the lead, it would be kind of odd. So it seemed like something should be looked at much more intensively here. And then that was an opportunity to really survey amongst some of the real visionaries in the field and say, is this the right time? And if so, how could we launch it in a way that inspired a lot of people who maybe weren't planning to work on the brain to decide to do so, because that had to be a big part of the success. So that clearly was going to require leadership to frame what this would be. And I went no further than going to the people sitting to my left to find the perfect leaders to be able to inspire the scientific community that this was going to be done really well, with opportunity for lots of input, lots of buy-in, lots of listening. So Corey and Bill, I think by the time, my memory's a little fuzzy, but I think by the time that announcement in the East Room, which you started off with from the president, which was April the 2nd, 2013, that Corey and Bill had already agreed to lead this working group, but the working group had a lot of work to do at that point. And that, again, was something that got the president excited. He wanted to do this. He didn't want to wait. One thing that maybe people have forgotten, and it's relevant to the current climate, is that this was a bad budget time. 2013, do you remember sequestration? That was 2013. And for the president to get up and say, we're going to do something brand new here, and we're going to spend $100 million, I think he said that number, it was all money that was pretty much already kind of in people's budgets. The neuroscience blueprint at NIH, which had been put together over several years, basically decided to throw their resources into this, as I recall. And there was some money from DARPA and some money from NSF. But it wasn't like, okay, here's a big fat check, go. It was kind of like, we have a big fat vision, and now try to figure out how to make it come true. When we look at the current climate, where again, we're in a difficult budget circumstance, and you heard from John just how difficult that is because of something that happened with the current budget and the cures money and the base and all of that. We've lived through that before, and here we are again. I think the message the last time was, go for it anyway with the vision, and you'll convince the skeptics that it's worth investing in. So that's kind of what I remember about how we got to April the 2nd, 2013. And then, of course, there had to be the hard work of putting together the plan. And that's where I'm sure you're going to want to turn to Corey and Bill.
So Corey, maybe you can describe the phone call you got from Francis.
Well, I think it's on. Okay. So I just want to say that one of the privileges we have as scientists is that we get to make decisions ourselves. We actually get to govern our own process. We review each other's papers, we review each other's grants, and it seems like work, but it's really us doing it. And I think what was special about this is that from the beginning, NIH could have said, well, we're doing this and here's how it's going to be. And instead they reached out to the scientific community and said, hey, tell us where the opportunities are, put this together. And, the committee started with us, but then we together with the institute directors pulled in a number of other extremely distinguished people from fields that we knew, I at least knew nothing about, like engineering and chemistry and human interventional brain manipulations. And that was part of the core committee. And then we went out and met around the country with 100 different scientists in different areas as we tried to work it out. And in each case, we felt we were able to draw from the experts of the field to put something together. And again, that is just such a privilege. And toward the end, we also went out to the leaders of the different clinical organizations, anesthesiology, psychiatry, neurology, and so forth. And we got their input on parts of the plan. My favorite thing, and I might bring this up again later, was that Bob Brown, who was at the time head of the American Academy of Neurologists, said, just whatever you do, don't make this all about the cortex. And we have learned so much about other parts of the brain because of the Brain Initiative. And that was just really inspiring to have someone like that kind of bring in something that, I've never seen a stroke patient. And he knew that if you had subcortical strokes, those were really serious and would tell you something. Learning about those parts of the brain would be really important. So it was a great intellectual experience to have that. And I think by the time we actually, finalized the report, it was clear that there was going to be new money for this, even though times were tight. And so that was also good because we didn't have to feel like we were taking things away from anyone else to do this new technology-based project.
So, Corey, you just described how your life went completely on hold for everything else for more than a year. How did I talk you into that anyway?
You're very persuasive, Francis.
Yeah.
It was the science.
It was the science. It was the excitement about the potential of the science. When you see something really big in front of you where you can have an impact, it's hard to say no. And I don't know why I should be telling the former director of the NIH that. Sorry, don't want to be too self-congratulatory up here, but it was the excitement of the science and the feeling that it would have an impact.
And Bill, you kind of got pulled into this.
Yes. So my experience was a little bit different from Francis and Corey. There are a few people in this room who know me well and know that I'm a glass half empty, tend to be a glass half empty person, and I see all the challenges. And I remember thinking, when I first heard about this, what are they thinking? No one's going to be able to take this on as a moonshot kind of program and stand in front of the TV cameras 10 years from now and say, job done. We did it on time and under budget. We understand the brain now, right? We got to be in this for the long haul. And I remember talking about this with Francis when I got a phone call from him one morning, asking me to work with Corey to help lead this new initiative. And I said, Francis, I'm a little skeptical, but give me 24 hours. I'll get Corey on the phone and talk with her, and I'll give you an answer by tomorrow morning. So I got Corey on the phone, and we knew each other from, Hughes meetings and things, whatever. And I said, Corey, this is going to take thousands of hours between us and the committee. And the chances are that it's going to be caught in Washington bureaucracy and the report will be packed on a shelf somewhere and never see the light of day. And I said, I'd really question whether we should get involved in this. And there was this silence for several seconds. And then Corey said, Bill, if this is worth the president's time to talk about neuroscience, it's worth our time to write the best report we can write. And what could I say to that?
Yes.
The only thing I could say was, let's go, let's do it. And I told Francis the next morning that I would join and do the best job we could on this, that it was challenging. But I echo Corey. It was great to kind of, in the end, get my head up above the weeds a bit, because I was so focused, hyper-focused on my own lab and the things we were doing, and to take a look at the field as a whole and really get contributions from experts around the country and try to say, what's the opportunity here? What should we as a country be doing and as a field to really advance brain science as far and as fast as possible? And I'm really gratified by what's happened in the last 10 years. I think it's just been fantastic, and that's due to all of you. And I think it's also due to the people at NIH. One of the things that is little known is that those of us who were on the planning committee, we were not allowed to be involved in the implementation at all. NIH has these conflict of interest rules, and if you're involved in the implementation, you can't actually apply for a grant and blah, blah, blah. So there was this wall between us and whoever at NIH would implement the thing. And at the end of, a year and a half of hard work, we threw this report over the wall, not knowing who was going to be there to catch it and what they would do with it. I remember that as being a very insecure kind of time. Okay, now we see, what's really going to happen. And it was amazing, the ferocity almost with which NIH took that up and ran with it. They formed this multi-council working group, and several of the scientists I know who were involved in the implementation inside of NIH, I talked to them personally, and they said they were working hard. They were trying to follow the report as well as possible, but they also said, I didn't have anything taken away from my job when they put this on me. I'm doing this in addition to the rest of my job. And they did it as a labor of love and with extreme earnestness. And I think they've done fantastically. And all of you who have been involved in that implementation, all of you in the labs who are doing the science, and all of you who've served on special study sections to evaluate these brain grant proposals, my hat's completely off to you. You've done a fantastic job, and we have substantially succeeded, I think, in building fundamental tools, which was the first thing we really wanted to do, was do that tool development, especially in the first 5 years. And this meeting today is a testament to the success of that. And we're right at a point where we can start exploiting that fully, I think, in the next 10 years. So I'm really excited and really ready to work to see that the funding gets there for another 10 years of brain.
Thanks, Bill. A couple of things really resonate with me. One was your approach, the approach of the committee, the working group, and that, we talk a lot these days about the concept of inclusion, but really this is how brain was built. It was built around seeking out opinions, not just from a small cadre of folks, but across the field, thought leaders across the field and across the country, to really figure out what we want to do. And I learned, to the extent I can learn, I learned a while ago that when you start something new, the decisions you make early on set the tone, set the culture for how things are going to go later. And this really set the pace. Everything we do in Brain is bottom up. We don't decide top down, we're going to do this project and that's the way it's going to be. We really listen to the talent out there based on their accomplishments, based on their vision, their dreams about where it can go. And then we just try our best to enable it. So this is really hats off to you folks for kind of setting that tone, that culture. Caroline, the other day you mentioned to me that one of the roles of philanthropy is to allow people to live their dreams. And I know that, you're right now at the Dana Foundation, you're really doing amazing work there. You were at the Cobley Foundation for quite a few years. And I just would love to hear your perspective about the role that philanthropy played in getting this amazing thing off the ground.
Absolutely, John, and thank you again for the invitation to be on this panel. It's so humbling and such an honor to be serving to share about the origin story of the Brain Initiative and look to the future with all of our distinguished panelists. So thank you for that. And I think, coming from the role of philanthropy, one thing I can say to Bill's comment about, a report, Brain 2025, sitting on a shelf somewhere, is that it did not sit on a shelf. We actually were there to catch it, along with NIH and others who have been involved in a partnership role around the BRAIN Initiative. And so I think, just drawing from my own story of how I started to come into the BRAIN Initiative, it's been really interesting, actually, because in many ways, I think the BRAIN Initiative has been a through line in my whole career. It was actually first launched when I was still a postdoctoral researcher in the Semmel Institute for Neuroscience and Human Behavior at UCLA. I still remember the roadshow that you all did when you came around and shared about what the vision of the BRAIN Initiative was. And for me, that was extremely inspiring. As you say, John, I think that, this initiative being an invitation to the scientific community to dream about what the future of neuroscience could be was something that I hadn't seen up to that point. And I also think that that was one of the things that really drew me into science philanthropy. So after UCLA, I joined the Kavli Foundation. And at the Kavli Foundation, for those of you who aren't aware, and as Dr. Collins had referred to, played a really important role in convening scientists in that bottom-up way that you describe, to help contribute ideas for what the BRAIN Initiative could become. Once it was launched, I remember, this is where the BRAIN 2025 report came into play, is how will this be implemented, especially if it's something called a public-private partnership. What is that, and how do all these organizations possibly work together? And so it was at that point, the Kavli Foundation's role, wearing that hat at the time, it was really beautiful in thinking about how philanthropy could fill gaps and listen to the needs of the scientific community, and think about how we could collectively address those together. I remember there were a few needs that we were hearing really early on. One of them was, how will we get neuroscientists to collaborate with physicists, theoreticians, mathematicians, computer scientists, data scientists? And it was really a sociocultural challenge of getting these groups to work together. And so I remember, even continuing until this day, a lot of the work that we were doing were starting things like coffee hours across different universities in the US. I remember even launching some Kavli Institutes to bring those different disciplines together. And that continued with the launch of the BRAIN Initiative Alliance. There are many other organizations that are not on this stage, but within there, like the Simons Foundation, of course, Kavli, NSF, DARPA, FDA, IARPA. And so there were just many organizations that came together and recognized, okay, this is something different. It's also going to take a different model of collaboration. And we also know that collaboration moves at the speed of trust, so we better get started early. And so I think that was, some of my recollection of those early days. And it's just been so wonderful to see, I think, all of the development over what seems like a flash of 10 years, because so many younger trainees at that time, I remember, were coming from these other disciplines and wondering, is there a role for me here? Where do I fit into a department? I'm trained in engineering. Where do I fit? I'm a data scientist. And I think that what's really blossomed is a space, a venue, an environment for science where these different disciplines and researchers can come together and work across disciplines, but also in these larger teams that aim to reach these higher order transformative goals. So, I just wanted to share that from my perspective. I know I've mostly talked about the retrospective view in those early days, but even since that time, when I talk about the BRAIN Initiative being a central thread in my career, it's through the initiative that I started to get very interested in the ethical and societal implications of neuroscience, which then attracted me to join the Dana Foundation, which is based in New York City, because that foundation was then going through a revision of its mission to focus on the intersection of neuroscience and society. So thinking about how all these incredible new neuroscience discoveries and neurotechnologies will then flow into the world to benefit people's lives. And so, I was such a fan of the initiative, I even recruited the neuroethics director of the NIH BRAIN Initiative, Kara Ramos, who's been a wonderful partner in the strategy and programming for the foundation. So I just wanted to say, I think channeling in that sort of next generation perspective, I think that the initiative helped to launch careers and inspire vision in many different ways, both academically as well as in the private sector.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's been really amazing is this rich ecosystem that's developed organically, not just the NIH being a player here, but also philanthropic organizations, other agencies, and collaborations around the world. Uh, Eddie, do you remember when the BRAIN initiative was first announced? You were just starting out, I think, at UCSF.
Yeah, I remember the exact day actually, and I remember reading the front page in the New York Times that there was going to be a BRAIN initiative. I had no idea what form, but I do remember it because I was just out. I had just started my lab maybe 3 years previous, and we were just starting to do a lot of new work on human neuroscience and just thinking what might be done as part of this greater effort.
Yeah, and we had this meeting back when I was at UC Berkeley. Eddie, you had just finished your postdoc there and moved across the bay. We had a meeting up at Lawrence Berkeley National Labs talking to computer scientists, material scientists, engineers. Just, Caroline, the opportunity to dream about, well, what could be done if we put our heads together on this? It really really developed into something quite amazing, I think, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think I was at the right time at the right place because I was working with a lot of our colleagues at UC Berkeley in engineering. And one of the things that we briefly touched on, but haven't really a lot yet, is sort of this vision that you, Corey, and Bill had for not just focusing on neuroscience, but who are the other potential stakeholders in technology, engineering, chemists, et cetera, that really had potential solutions to problems that we're all addressing all throughout neuroscience. So I thought that was actually one of the most innovative things about the BRAIN initiatives, like you said, this inclusive nature to bring tool builders and to have this really clear vision that this was going to be about tools. It was not everything that has to do with the brain or spine, but we were going to focus on technologies that we need for the next several decades of discovery. I thought that was brilliant, and the values you guys instilled in the culture was, I think, something very enduring.
So, Corey and Bill, what was how did you kind of get the engineers and physical scientists kind of their input, their kind of views on this? How did you kind of move this into the field?
We had our original committee had Mark Schnitzer, who is in engineering, and Carl Diceroth, who, although he's a molecular engineer, he's definitely an engineer by appointment in a bioengineering department, and in sensibility of problem solving. And so, again, from the very beginning, that was baked into the group that was thinking about this problem. What would it take to do this? We had people from industry come and present to us about, the recording arrays, the Utah arrays at that point were the only game in town. How do you actually record from a brain? So it was, we saw that as, if you want to do technology, you need engineers to do technology. And I think it was a surprise in the BRAIN initiative that when the first call for grants went out, half of them, of the applications that came back, were from engineers. So BRAIN had gotten on their radar as well. And when I look at a lot of the people out here, and when I was looking at the posters today, I see that a lot of you are coming from those engineering backgrounds and are still bringing that and are still really committed to this question and this problem. And I think that's not something that's always been true at the NIH, if I can say that. And so
right.
I think that this is something where this community really caught fire with this idea.
Absolutely true. I'm curious, would all the engineers raise their hands? I'm curious to see what this audience looks like. Oh boy, it's a forest.
Yeah, typically it's about a third of the folks here.
And that's just wonderful. That was part of the dream that you helped create by making it clear that this is an opportunity scientifically, and it's a welcoming environment. We're going to have to learn how to understand each other's languages. And that took a little while, but my goodness, the things that happen then when you start to bring those disciplines together. There's a little joke about engineers, which I think kind of captures it a little bit. The optimist says the glass is half full. The pessimist says the glass is half empty. The engineer says the glass is twice too big.
Touche, Bill.
Yeah, I would
I think, yeah, just speak.
I would echo that, but I would add another group on that has really been, I think, really important for the Brain Initiative and will be even more so in the future. That's computational neuroscience and theory. And I wonder how many of you self-identify as a computationally oriented neuroscientist. So a healthy number, but not as many as the engineers. But I remember, Carolyn, back in one of the first meetings in spring of 2013, I think, when Kavli and the NSF sponsored a meeting before the Brain Initiative was actually properly going in Washington. And there was so much enthusiasm. There were little lightning things about what we should do and could be doing. And a keynote address was given by Robert Laughlin, a physicist from Stanford who won a Nobel Prize for the theoretical part of superconducting theory. What he was doing at a neuroscience conference, I have no idea. But he said something really important after kind of listening to the gushing coming forth about all of our new technologies and all the new data we could get. He said, you neuroscientists have to be careful. There is a failure mode lurking for you, and that is that at the end of 10 years of a Brain Initiative, you will have gathered disks and disks and disks full of data, and you will simply be 10 years older. Okay? And what he meant was, you can have all the data in the world, but if you don't understand what it means, if you don't have a theoretical perspective to stand and plan experiments and to interpret complex data, then you haven't really made much progress just by collecting data. And that is really that's something that we grabbed that nettle in our committee. That was a key feature of our report. And it felt sometimes like we were imagining this kind of fairyland where engineers and theorists and experimentalists and clinically oriented people and chemists and molecular biologists were all come together and hold hands and play nicely together. And here you are. It's a wonderful thing to see. So I think that was, along with and this was not just kind of a fairyland building, and we didn't see it as just a Narnia-like outcome, but we thought this was essential. It was essential if we were going to seize the opportunities that the next decade presented, given the new tools that were coming aboard. This was essential. It was not icing on the cake. It was a necessity, and that all people from these backgrounds should work together on this problem. Literally, we talked about it as being an all hands on deck kind of affair, and that was essential to the success that we've had.
Yeah. So again, getting back to this, the essential vision here to set the pace, to set the tone, to set the culture. The other thing we talk about a lot at Brain is the importance of having diverse perspectives to come to bear on these incredibly complex problems. And arguably, there's nothing more complex to understand than the human brain. So this has really been, I think, for me, thrilling to watch, to bring all these different kinds of expertise to bear on these problems, but not just to bring different folks together, but actually have them working as teams. And I think one thing that we've seen that makes Brain different, I think, from the rest of the way we were doing science before was having these diverse teams working on these problems. Some of them small teams, half a dozen or 3, 4, 5 labs, to gigantic teams, as witness as the earth-moving projects like the brain cell census. And this really was, again, just a great launching off point to recognize that it was going to, for certain things, it was going to take a different way of doing business. So another thing that kind of came up early on, I remember President Obama mentioned this, didn't just mention it, he stated it emphatically in the beginning, was the importance of incorporating ethics, right? Being aware of what we're doing, the potential rewards that we can gain, but also the potential, shall we say, harms. For instance, what were the conversations around that as the initiative was launched?
Well, it's clear the president was very interested in that area, not just for an East Room speech, but very much in his own DNA. This concern that if we're going to be studying, in many ways, the essence of human personality, the brain, that we ought to be respectful about the ways in which that might potentially do some harm if we're not careful about it. So he wanted to be sure that that was true. And that this would be an area of emphasis, that it would involve multiple perspectives, not just from scientists who could always be accused a little bit of a conflict of interest because we want to do science, but also from the public about where the boundaries might need to be when it comes to certain kinds of activities. And that's been, I think, really important over the last 10 years to have that component of this project very much front and center, whether it's talking about organoids and exactly what is the status of that kind of an entity when it's derived from human cells, or whether it's some consequence of brain-computer interfaces, which I know there was a whole session about today. Are we really thinking about this in the sense that we should be when you're talking about an organ which deserves probably incredibly high status amongst all the things that we do as human biologists and physicians? So, yeah, I should ask Corey and Bill, as you were framing what became Brain 2025, how did that part of the consideration play out in all of the town meetings that you had and other ways in which you were seeking input?
Yeah, I think things were a little bit different at Brain 1.0 than Brain 2.0, the midterm planning committee led by John Mansell and Catherine DeLocke. In the beginning, President Obama mandated the ethical issues to his President's Council on Bioethics. So it didn't come straight to us. We weren't involved in those discussions in that writing. For Brain 2.0, there was explicitly a separate committee on bioethics and a separate committee on the science. And these things get integrated to some extent, and to some extent they get integrated when the need arises. But I think, there's so many, many people in this room know better than I do, but there's so many places where neuroscience, really the cutting edge of research, borders on important issues in social policy and in ethics. The most obvious being maybe in brain-machine interfaces, where informed consent is really important. And ultimately, what's the goal of brain-machine interfaces and devices being inserted into the brain? Is the goal to treat disease, or injury, which I think all of us would agree is one of our ethical priorities, or do you want to actually try to augment normal human cognition, right? You want to make people who are better at certain things than others. And this is, of course, the whole goal of Neuralink and Elon Musk and establishing that company. But there are real ethical issues, and it goes right down to the heart of what does it mean to be human? What are humans, and are there prospects for improving ourselves in some way? So this is common to genetics as well, right? With the CRISPR revolution, yeah. But there are many others. I mean, addiction, whatever we do or can't do about addiction comes to very serious social policy issues. The neurobiology of sex and gender is loaded with potential social and policy issues. Neurobiology effects on the brain of socioeconomic status or this, that, and the other, very loaded ethically and policy-wise. And we could go on. And the organoids, the wiring up some kind of primitive nervous system in a dish. At what point does that become of ethical concern? So, we all have to be sensitive to these things, and we all have to understand that there are other stakeholders. This is one place where science is self-governing, yes, but in the ethics in particular, the pool of stakeholders is much larger, and we have to be prepared to listen and be involved in give and take with a larger pool.
Yeah, I think the engagement with the folks that we purport to help is absolutely critical. And I'd love to hear from Caroline from the kind of the policy point of view, but also from Eddie, because as a pioneer in brain-computer interface and also in adaptive technologies for treating a whole range of disorders, it'd be great to hear kind of the perspectives from the policy angle, but also, from the researcher and physician angle on the ground. So, Caroline, I mean, you've steered the Dana Foundation toward this incredibly interesting and important area of neuroscience and society. How does this kind of shape all that we do?
Absolutely, John. And I just have to express I'm so grateful that Brain 2025 included this call out to the ethical, legal, and societal implications of neuroscience and neurotechnology. I think, one other one other step in my career was working with the international brain initiatives that were emerging or established at the time. So that, of course, included the US, the Brain Initiative, but also the initiative that had been established in Europe. And there were also some upcoming initiatives coming from Canada, Korea, China, Australia. And I remember in 2016, Corey, Rafa, Yuste, and others were involved in convening the leaders of these large-scale initiatives together and asked the questions, what are areas that you all think you could foresee yourselves collaborating on, sharing knowledge with each other, developing paths forward that could maximize the potential of your individual initiatives. And one of the areas they highlighted was the area of neuroethics. And so that was really a major, I think, signal to myself and many in the community to think about, what does this mean? How can this be incorporated into education, training, community engagement on neuroscience and society issues? And that ended up becoming a really important facet of the Dana Foundation's work, because while the Dana Foundation had historically been involved in funding neuroscience research in the 1990s, as well as education and outreach on neuroscience, so Brain Awareness Week is one of the signature initiatives of the foundation, there was this recognition right before I came on board. So I remember in 2020 that the Dana Foundation then recognized neuroscience and society being a focus area. And so they brought me on board to help define that vision, that mission, and that set of programs along with the team there. And so I think one of the things that we've been learning and observing is that I think even on the part of scientists, and I think that this will be a good segue to Eddie actually, that there's that recognition coming from the ground up. So going back to that theme of being a really bottom-up driven initiative, many scientists were saying, oh, I am doing brain-computer interface research. I am doing I'm using organoid models in my research, and these have the potential to form assembloids and so on. And so I think that it's been a really interesting growth of that recognition within in the Brain Initiative community especially, that I've seen. And I think that this is also where the neuroethics working group of the Brain Initiative comes into play, because then there's also support to do it. I think oftentimes when it comes to bringing in people from ethics, law, social sciences, policy, that tends to be work that's so on the periphery of what might be defined as science that it can go unsupported. But having a line item, having dedicated support and a call out to that helps to prioritize that as being valued within the science system. And so I would just say that I'm so grateful again, that this is something that has been coming up in such an organic way within the scientific community. And I think one other point I just want to make sure that I also mention that's related to Bill's point, that the kinds of questions that are brought up in science and technology development go beyond the science community itself. And this is where the importance of public engagement, community engagement, patient engagement. I was thrilled to see that there was an entire session, a symposium on this today, related to brain-computer interfaces. But, I think that this is where that sort of epistemic humility comes into play, that recognizing that not all questions around how science can be integrated into people's lives can be answered by scientists alone. It needs to be in conjunction and collaboration with people from other fields, as well as communities, These are the people who are going to be using this for the benefit of their lives. So I also just wanted to mention that point. There's that humility aspect that comes into play.
Yeah, thank you. It's a great perspective. And Eddie, I'm sure people would love to hear about your perspective. I mean, you're doing this every day when you're planning the studies, when you're caring for your patients, which of course is the utmost importance for you, we know. How has all this shaped your thinking and your approach toward these studies that are so invaluable to understanding how this amazing thing works, the brain?
Yeah, so I think on the human neuroscience, the ethics takes a whole nother level. And the Brain Initiative in many ways is, I think, a real renaissance not just in human neuroscience, but all through the community. Looking at Lee Chun's talk this morning, mapping the entire research technologic system, it's just incredible what's possible today. And we will look back, on this time period and recognize how important it is for a lot of foundational technology and knowledge. And that's because of the engineering. But there was this other part of the Renaissance, which is really understand these other facets, like who are the stakeholders, who are the people that are participating in these studies. For us, the direct ethical implications were pretty much every aspect of what we were doing. So one thing that we haven't talked about is, what are the ethical implications of doing neuroscience research in humans having brain surgery, for example? And admittedly, when we started, at the time that the Brain Initiative started, I think that the status quo was a little bit in the shadows. Actually, there were no standards for this. And we realized pretty quickly that as this was going to scale up, and there were actually going to be a formalized way of supporting it, and that this was actually going to be a very visible part of the Brain Initiative, we better figure this out very quickly, what that's going to look like. So one of the things I give a lot of credit to the architects, again, and the whole community, is really understanding what the importance of that. So there is a part of the Brain Initiative called Research on Humans, and it has really an incredible group of investigators, of clinicians, neurologists, neurosurgeons, but also ethicists that are involved with it. And so I teamed up with one of my colleagues, neurologist, Winston Chong, who's here. He's actually trained as an ethicist, and we actually struggled to put together one of the first papers on doing neuroscience research on humans undergoing brain surgery. And part of the struggle was, really trying to think about a framework. There were so many things that we felt that were hard to explain, basically, issues about potential coercion, around the consent, around the technology, the risks. All of these things were very hard to actually put down into words, but we made a first stab at it, and it was actually very hard to get published at the very beginning. Very hard. Most of the major journals rejected it. Once the ROH picked it up as a consortium effort, we had a much bigger group effort led by an amazing ethicist, Ashley Feisinger, who's at UCLA. She had a separate job of herding neurosurgeon and neurology cats to really redefine some of these parameters. Some of the things that we came up with is, there's certain dimensions of doing research in human subjects that we need to think about very explicitly, like what are the specific risks of the specific neurosurgical indication, and how far does it deviate from what is standard clinical care? There are two specific dimensions that we identified. And then third important critical dimension is the consent. How aware and how voluntary is all of this? And so as I'm reflecting now, these things are absolutely critical, for this next generation, because we have these new tools now that are more powerful than ever. And it's actually been very powerful to actually have an ethical framework to think about how to do this kind of work as well. So that's a set of ethical considerations that's not about the future, like if you could read someone's mind or control, their behavior, that kind of thing. These are things that we have had to work on that I'm very proud of being part of the ROH, that affects the research that we're doing now. And I'm not saying that we've completely solved this, but I think we've made great progress.
Yeah, I think just the awareness that this must be integrated in everything we do, I think is key. And we are building the plane as we fly it, are we not? Right. So let's take the last bit of time here to think about the future. Let's dream about the future. I'm going to ask this as a multi-part question, just kind of throw it out to you all. I mean, one question is, what surprised you? What kind of came out of left field that maybe you didn't see coming? And what might be the future disruptions? And I would also like to plant the seed that maybe, well, I think certainly our futures will be determined by this thing called artificial intelligence. And certainly it's being incorporated in our research, but I'd love to hear your thoughts about how neuroscience can drive the field of artificial intelligence, how we can use this to find better ways of computing, better ways of understanding data, finding more efficient compute platforms. I mean, 15 watts is not bad, what's going on up here, right? And of course, the societal implications of all this. So I just want to kind of throw that out as an open question and just hear your thoughts on this. Sure.
Sure. So there were things that we expected from the Brain Initiative that came out, like the census of cell types, and then you see the things that are coming out of that as well, like now looking at that as a framework for studying disease like Alzheimer's disease and seeing which cells are affected at which times in the Seattle project, which is just amazing. But I would say that some of the things that we didn't expect at all, just coming out in the past year or two, have been the importance of communication between the brain and the body. And the degree to which the immune system regulates the function of the brain regulates the function of the immune system, that is innervation of each individual organ in the body that then sends sensory information up to the brain and then gets motor information back out, and the extent to which that we're seeing those pathways, which have been known anatomically for hundreds of years, the importance of those pathways and the links between the different parts of our biology, I think we are just beginning to scratch the surface of that. And I think that in terms of looking at the next generation of what we should be thinking about, GLP-1 is made by the gut, and it has incredible effects on human behavior and on human health and on many organs. The brain is part of that story, the gut is, the kidney now, the heart. Just kind of recognizing the relationships between those systems is going to be something where I feel like there's a very big, we can still be neuroscientists, we can still be brain-centered, but I think we need to bring the body into this as well. And then the second area that I think just has tremendous significance, and I'm seeing that at this meeting particularly, is we can start to look toward a set of therapies based on our knowledge of cells and circuits for a large number of brain disorders. And we were careful not to promise too much about that 10 years ago, but the things that I'm seeing now are remarkable. 10 years ago, we were really impressed by how deep brain stimulation worked for Parkinson's disease, how a circuit-based approach could affect this neurological disorder. But we're now seeing, that's an extremely expensive, complicated intervention. And a number of the people here are starting to use non-invasive methods and others out there like, transcranial magnetic stimulation and DCS and ultrasound and pointing at particular circuits, and actually developing, these things are much more successful than they have any right to be, considering how little we know about them, in affecting depression, in affecting memory. And I think the next generation of thinking about what the science is for treatments for brain-based disorders with this group of people and the technology's development and the increasing science around it is just a tremendous area of potential expansion for the next stage of what a brain initiative could be. We should not give up on basic science. We should continue to do basic science. As I said about the brain body, we're still just scratching the surface. We can't do all of that in humans. But the potential now, I think, for really meaningful human interventions is closer than we think.
Yeah, Bill, I see you picking up the mic, but Eddie, you and I, just for a second, you and I have had a conversation about, I think, your dream about incorporating specific cellular information into the work that you and your colleagues do. Do you want to kind of maybe play with that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So I think that just with the talk, this really amazing symposium we had earlier organized today by Lee and Samir, I think is just a preview, a sneak peek at what's to come in the coming years. And it's not so much about the single cell, but really understanding cellular level physiology in the human brain, just as an example, at scale. So one of the things that I'm seeing and recognizing even in our own work is that this point about scale is very important. It's really trying to understand, not at the scale of like dozens or tens of example cells, but really hundreds, thousands, millions, and probably in the next, decade, billions potentially really coming into the equation. And so that's challenging, but I think that's a really extraordinarily exciting thing that's coming. And it didn't have to be this way, but we now have computational tools that will at least give us the first pass. I mean, this whole AI thing has happened in parallel with us. And I think, thank God it happened right, well, okay, pretty close. Corey's shaking your head. But long story short is that we do have tools now that are much more powerful than we had 5 years ago. That's uncontroversial. And it may not solve all the problems, but I think that, Bill, you alluded to this earlier with this 10 years worth of data in the lab. I think that we now have tools that we could actually utilize with them. So this is an extraordinary time to be thinking about sort of the interface between how much data that's going to be collected, the quality of the data, and then the new computational infrastructures that we're going to do. And I completely agree with Corey that we will never have what we need to understand the human brain just from the human brain, the living human. It's just, I don't think anyone in our community has figured that way out. And so I think we really do need to understand model systems better and to have more complete whole brain knowledge of model systems, because ultimately a lot of our mechanisms are very shared across species. And so I think as all of these systems come online in parallel, we may be at a new level of understanding. So that's what I'm super excited about in the coming decade.
Thanks. Bill? I saw you fingering the mic.
Yeah, there's so many things that I want to say, and I can't say them all. I think, one of the things that has most intrigued me across my entire career, and I've not even been able to dream of trying to address until the last 10, 15 years, is how populations of neurons compute and process information in a way that underlies intelligent adaptive behavior. And for the bulk of my career, we've recorded from neurons one at a time, and at the end of 2 years, I'd clutch my hoard of 300 well-studied neurons and then try to imagine how they were acting together to do something intelligent and build models of how they might be acting together. And now in one evening, Li Chen or many of you in your labs, you can record from thousands of neurons and one from an awake animal in one session. I mean, this is a paradigm change. It's a complete paradigm change. And you can actually then, the analytic challenges are still huge once you have these data to say, well, how do we detect patterns in these simultaneously active neurons? How do we determine what pattern might be a useful computation and what we're just seeing through some kind of statistical randomness? I mean, this is very demanding and there are a lot of places to go wrong. But to me, this has opened up a whole new window on how brains compute. And the idea that you have a high dimensional space because you have a large number of neurons, and the fact that there may be a low number of dimensions that are related to some particular computation, which means combinations. When I say low dimension, it just means combinations of neurons. These are new ways of thinking about this problem that we did not have 10, 15 years ago and that we have in our lexicon now. And I see us this past decade as being the techniques really coming online and then continuing to improve, and us starting the baby steps of what it takes to do that analytical work. And I see that as the biggest challenge in my field, systems neuroscience, for the next 10, 20, even 30 years probably, is trying to ask how you get intelligent answers out of that question, answers to that question. The other thing that's on my mind, John, that you and I spoke briefly about is just the trajectories of the study of natural intelligence, what I call natural or biological intelligence, and artificial intelligence. And are these two things going to converge on some sets of principles about intelligent adaptive behavior? Or are they going to be like ships passing in the night? And as institute director, that mattered to me because it influenced my faculty hiring policies. The ship's passing in the night, get it out of here. I don't want that. But that is something that's latent. And some of you who teach, like I've been teaching this last quarter, a course on social and ethical issues in the neurosciences. And we've relied for years teaching this course on midterm and final essays. And for the first time this year, I've had to worry about whether those essays are being written by human students or by chatbots. And I actually purchased a couple of subscriptions to two LLM or ChatGPT model detectors, and I've run some of the student essays through that, and that probably is an honor code violation at Stanford, actually, that I did that without telling the students. But it did not affect my grading of their papers, so I don't think it was really an honor code violation. But just the fact that we're here now, for crying out loud, that I have a hard time telling the difference between an essay or pieces of an essay written originally by a student and those that are generated by an artificial machine. That's a remarkable point to come to, and that's only going to get more acute in the future. So these are the things that are really on my mind as we look at the future.
Yeah, so Caroline, I mean, considering this relationship between neuroscience and society that you've been kind of diving into, look in your crystal ball in 10 years' time, what are we going to be grappling with? What do you think?
Yes, thank you, John. Oh my gosh, this discussion is so exciting because I love hearing from the fellow panelists about what they see as the future. I just love the answers that have come online already. So when I think about the future of neuroscience and society, I think part of what I think about is actually going back to the start of this conversation. You started, John, with this thinking about the culture of science. And I think one of the interesting aspects about the BRAIN Initiative is that it was an opportunity to envision a future where it's not only about the science discovery and neurotechnology development, but also how that's done, how that's carried out. And so when I envision a future of neuroscience and its role in the world, I think about it in a couple of ways. I think, one of them, and again, this draws from much of what we've been hearing at this conference in several sessions, is this sort of training, this education and training of the next generation of scientists to be able to consider these kinds of ethical and societal implications as it relates to their work. I think that, one of the interesting things that I remember talking with Eddie very early on, as I was, even thinking about the work at the Kavli Foundation and then now at the Dana Foundation, I think one of the sentiments that was expressed is that there's not really a sort of systematic way to train all of these new graduate students and postdocs who are coming into labs and coming in with this really strong appetite for understanding the connections to society. How will this all flow into the world? How can I engage with different communities to help to answer these really deep, fundamental questions about science's role in the world? And so I would hope and I envision that there could be some component that includes, more innovative, interactive, perhaps dialogue-based training for scientists to be able to consider this. I myself studied biomarkers for psychiatric illness in a genetic high-risk population. My training was a responsible conduct and research module online every year. I would have loved more than that. And then also, again, going back to the incentives concept is having the support to do that. This isn't something that one does on the side, something one has to seek out in their spare time, but there could also be some integration, some intentional integration into the science process. And perhaps that could, with intentional community engagement, that could even lead to new research questions, new research approaches. So that's one way. When I think about this community and this next generation of scientists, that's one of the things that I think about. And perhaps if I could also just say that I think that the plan for enhancing diverse perspectives, as well as the model of public-private partnerships, are two aspects of the initiative that I think are are quite special. And, coming from the philanthropic perspective, we often, in just natural impromptu conversations, people will say, oh, what's an example of a successful public-private partnership? And many people do mention the BRAIN Initiative as one example of that. And I think that's a testament to how the initiative has been carried out, this intention to bring in diverse perspectives coming from other sectors, other fields, as well as communities.
Thanks. The hour's getting late. We want to make time for some questions, but Francis, I'm going to give you the last word from your incredible perch over not just this thing we call the BRAIN Initiative, but NIH more broadly. What do you see the future? What are the possibilities? How does Francis Collins dream about the BRAIN Initiative?
Actually, this conference has given a chance to do a lot of dreaming, so appreciate the chance to say a word or two about that. I mean, first of all, just congratulations to all of you for what's happened over these 10 years. We're already sort of going into the future, but let's for a moment reflect upon what has been accomplished by this group of researchers in many different areas with some dramatic consequences as a result. I have to mention the cell census project because that was just such a phenomenal team effort. And John, you deserve a lot of credit for pushing that forward and making sure it came forward in a way that the data's out there. Back in the days of the Genome Project, we used to talk about projects that were going to give you temporary data sets that you would probably be glad you had, but which would then be superseded by something that was deeper and better. Drafts versus things that you could actually say, I'm going to look at this in 5 years. So the focus on things like that in BRAIN is always going to be a good idea. Are there data sets that we're in a position to actually generate that are going to stand the test of time? And I think the cell census, much of what's been there fits that particular description. I would love going forward to see that same kind of data set, kind of with Bill here, attaching to the ability to identify what's really going on in circuits. And obviously, much of that's going to have to depend on model organisms, but we're getting pretty good at some of the human stuff, as I saw today. And with technologies like those neuropixels that give you almost single cell resolution, it just feels like something's getting ready to emerge here that is going to be truly powerful and may finally give us real answers to how things work in the brain that we currently can see in a rather blurry fashion. I hope if we have this meeting again in 5 years that somebody will explain exactly how you lay down a memory and how you retrieve it. I mean, wouldn't that be a cool goal to try to aim for? I know we got bits and pieces of that, and somebody will say, well, I already know the answer, but we really don't, do we? And wouldn't that be a really amazing thing to be able to point to and to achieve? I also think the fact that this is a basic science enterprise has been right from the beginning and must continue to be right, but I'm also really glad there's an ROH program, the research on humans, and every opportunity to take things down that road should be grabbed onto because people are waiting for those answers for sure. And some of those answers need not be pills. Maybe there are other kinds of therapeutics, cell-based, electricity-based, gene therapy-based. I think most of you who are tracking this know that the advances that are happening in vectors that can get things into the brain, whether they're viruses or whether they're nanoparticles or lipid particles, they're getting better and better. This has been a really hard problem for many, many years, but it is starting to yield up some pretty interesting advances. So the idea you might be able to deliver something to the human brain if you knew what you wanted to deliver is no longer a hypothetical. And then finally, I would say, I'm really glad we're also looking at therapeutics that don't require pills or other interventions, because an awful lot of the miseries that humans experience from when the brain is not doing the right thing or in the mental health arena, if we could figure out, by understanding the circuits, how to make psychotherapy even vastly better than it is right now, that would be a huge contribution without the need to write a prescription, but to actually improve our understanding of how to interfere with circuits that have gone awry. I had the pleasure this afternoon to being part of this session about how music as a form of intervention can also have real power to give people relief from pain, from PTSD, can provide advances in areas like dementia. There is a wonderful opportunity to bring together, once again, an interdisciplinary area between music therapists and neuroscientists that I think is ripe to go even further down that road. So all of these potentials are out there. The next few years are going to be phenomenally exciting, and that's because of all of you. And I will do everything I can in the sense that I still have some credibility on the Hill to be sure that the Congress realizes that if they want to see a day where people are less and less suffering from disorders of the brain, this project is probably the best investment they can make for that future.
You're here. So we'd like to open the floor to questions, if people would like, and also from the folks that are online. I see Ryan getting up. Why don't we start over here, and then we can kind of move across?
I would like to ask Dr. Chang. I'm an unapologetic admirer of your papers, but it's frustrating to think that all of that hard work was just 20 minutes of recording. By what path do we get out of that corner and to something that is really longer and deeper?
Yeah, well, thanks for that question, and I appreciate it. And a couple things. So just to put it in the context, why 20 minutes for people to understand? Some of this work that we've described is really in the setting of people having awake brain surgeries, where we have this very, very special context and privilege to record from a fellow human being in the setting of a medical procedure. And this is something that Winston Chong and I have really talked a lot. Why do people actually volunteer to do this? Why in heaven's sake would you do it? And the answer is almost universally the same for people, what they say, which is that if this will help someone else in the future, I'd like to do that. I think it's a very powerful thing, and actually it's very hard to understand that unless you are suffering yourself, to really understand how important it is for us to improve knowledge. And so in many cases, for someone who's like, quote unquote, healthy, it's very hard to understand that. So that's the really limited context we have for doing these recorders, and all the ethics work that we've done is really to make sure we protect that very altruistic intention that people have. Now, to answer your question, we really need technology that is high performance, safe, and robust over time. And that's still a challenge, I think, in the neural interfaces realm. We have Ferraris and Lamborghinis now for doing high throughput single unit recordings, but they're not necessarily in the form factor that we need them to last for like 10, 20, 30 years. And so I think a major challenge is still ahead. And I think it's hopefully, I think we saw some clues from Dr. Lan, earlier today, flexible electrodes. But then another question is, how do you scale this on the order of, thousands and millions of cells that we ultimately would want? So I think we still have a lot of work ahead of us. I appreciate your comment. We got to get beyond this 20-minute segment to something that gives us more longitudinal recording. But that 20 minutes right now is really, really precious. And we're learning a lot from it.
Thanks. Ryan, we have some questions from the folks online.
Yeah, absolutely. So the final question that Dr. and I posed to the panel really challenged you all to think about what the future of brain might entail. But this question from the audience, from the online audience, really asks to build on that and asks who might be part of the future of brain initiative. So thinking about diverse disciplines that we might consider looping in the future. So for example, thinking about behavioral science, evolutionary science, anthropology, philosophy, to really get to the heart of a more holistic view of how the brain works in the real world.
I guess the answer is yes. Yeah. I mean, we're working that way. I've learned an incredible amount just in the field of ethics, bioethics, neuroethics, and I've come to appreciate that there are people with these different experiences, walks of life. We have folks with lived experiences, absolutely critical in informing what we do, how we do it, and our goals here. We have lawyers on the committee. I won't make a lawyer joke, I promise. We have lawyers on the committee. We have philosophers. We have surgeons, right? Physicians, neurologists. And this is kind of bringing all voices to the table. Again, it goes back to the very beginning, the origin story of brain, to be inclusive of all these different perspectives and voices. It's so critical for us. We've just launched this brain behavior quantification and synchronization project, which is heavily behavior-based, to synchronize, to kind of align these studies with the amazing neurophysiology that we're gaining from all the studies that we've supported over the last 10 years. So this is, I think, our future. It's our doors are open. We welcome all comers, anybody that has a passion for understanding how this thing works and can bring a unique perspective. This is what's going to propel and continue propelling the field forward. You guys, please. Bill?
Yeah, I echo the all-comers part, and I would say that the behavioral sciences, for example, I mean, my entire career has been built on the solid foundation of behavioral science in experimental psychology. The quantitative measurement of perceptual capabilities, the quantitative measurement of attention, of memory. Behavioral sciences are critically important, and much of the innovation of the last 10 years represented in this room depends on the measurement of behavior and splitting behaviors into so-called syllables that can be rearranged to execute different large-scale behaviors, and by the syllables trying to enable us to get down to the neural substrates and what are the neural mechanisms underlying any individual syllable and how they get strung together depending on behavioral context. I mean, that is part warp and fabric of the field. Somebody mentioned philosophy. I just had the pleasure of doing 7 months of sabbatical in London, and I was in the Institute for Philosophy at the University of London, and I was hanging out with philosophers who were interested in the problems, the conceptual foundations of neuroscience, cognitive science, and psychology, and I was particularly focused on explanation and causation and mechanism, these words that get thrown around so much in our field, right? Everybody wants to be a mechanist, but there's no clear agreement on what mechanism means. And in terms of causation, I think that a behavioral causation is just as, a behavioral intervention in a system is just as causal as an optogenetic intervention in a system. And I don't think that there's any level of a system that is privileged to say we are fundamental and we are causal and the rest of you are not. I think causality is distributed through the multiple levels of complex systems. And this is something I don't think neuroscientists reflect on nearly enough. And it gets caught out in the language that we use to communicate to the public. So I think there's a lot of room here to do that kind of collaboration, with even philosophy.
100%, Bill. Mark?
So I wanted to follow on from this, and in doing so, ask those people, again, the engineers, the computer scientists, the mathematicians, would you raise your right hand? Okay, now, if you're all, no, keep your right hands up. No, keep them up, because I want to ask you if you now consider yourself a neuroscientist to raise your left hand. Okay. 10 years ago, that wouldn't have been the case, would it? Right? And now, we've gone from a pup tent to a wedding tent. And that's really awesome. Now, in terms of speaking about awesome and the brain, the Brain Initiative, I just want to put in a plug for the American Brain Coalition. We're trying to help. We're trying to make sure that Congress does what not just the Brain Initiative, but the people deserve. And anyone who has any ideas, talk to us, and we're here to help.
So this is Dr. Mark Resnick. He's the president, the chair of the board of the American Brain Coalition, who's really they've done a phenomenal job in advocating for neuroscience and for helping people with neurological disorders. And we just appreciate your advocacy and your partnership with the Brain Initiative. So thanks, Mark.
And just for Bill, I wanted to tell you my day job is on biomarkers for depression. We have what looks like it's working now, and we are willing to bet anything that a placebo responder will look just like a drug responder.
Okay, thanks. Over here, please.
Hello. a decade of innovation. It's super remarkable. And throughout that, Brain has funded development of so many technologies. They've been instantiated across so many tools. And they even support tool dissemination through a couple different mechanisms. What's the plan and what should be the strategy for supporting the continued maintenance of tools, especially ones that have demonstrated to be essential, that people are building further layers of technology on? Because we, as the, wearing many hats, engineers and neuroscientists, to be effective practitioners and use tools, we need to remove a lot of the barriers to use those tools. And that takes engineering work. It takes plumbing. It takes maintaining our software packages. And it means updating our hardware designs to account for materials that aren't available in the supply chain anymore. What is the strategy for maintaining the tools and technologies that the Brain has funded the development of, but that don't have a way to support it beyond their project period?
Right. Great question. Did I mention we're building the plane as we fly it? Okay. So we talk a lot about engineering, about making tools, solving problems with technology. What we haven't talked so much about is systems engineering. And I think that's going to be our challenge for the next 10 years, is employing the principles and developing new principles for systems engineering to make sure that all these things we're developing, whether they're widgets, whether they're data resources across different modalities, I think that's a great challenge for you all to think about how to really kind of get that out there. We have an intentional focus on dissemination. We have, of the 9 project teams that are actually running the engine room in Brain, one of them is dissemination. But we really need to be thinking about this from a systems point of view. And I think maybe what we learn about how the brain works and these different computational models, maybe that will help us get there. So stay tuned. And we need a lot of young, fresh ideas on this, and we welcome you to kind of participate in that. So thanks for that question. It's very important to us, and it's something that we really need to be thinking even harder about. So time for a couple more questions. Yeah, please.
Hi, thank you so much. So Day1 Wang from Wisconsin. So everybody knows that AI is powerful and can analyze the data or even generate data. But unfortunately, actually, the AI and the neuroscience haven't talked to each other too much. So if you look at the neuroscience meeting versus the computer science meeting, I feel they are weakly connected. So how do you think we can engage people, in particular young generation, like in particular from the computer science side or AI side, to do the brain research? So to be honest, when I talk to the computer science student, they feel like brain is complex. So they feel like classifying dog and cat images are more interesting. So how can we engage people actually, like especially young generation, for the brain research? Right. Maybe found like a next AlphaFold for the brain research.
It's a great point. We're going to start out by going back to what works. We're going to convene people from different areas, perspectives, and in fact, coming up, we actually will have a workshop on neuro AI. So what could be the contributions of neuroscience toward AI and vice versa? So we will start by convening. These things don't happen magically, and again, we just have to bring people together and see what develops organically. And I think we'll just have to see how it goes and bring folks together to think about these problems in a way that they might not have before. I have to say though that I've never run into an engineer that I couldn't get interested in studying the brain. It's not that hard of a sell. You just have to get the right people in the room.
Have you thought about, as part of that workshop, basically trying to come up with a series of grand challenges for what AI and neuro could do together? So it's not quite so nebulous as it might seem right now to somebody who's wondering about this field. Okay, here are some specific challenges that maybe could be addressed with a lot of smart people.
Yes. Okay, please.
Oh, wow, this is a great segue to my question. So I'm actually a computer science, study artificial intelligence. So there's a lot of talk about the artificial general intelligence. One day it will be smarter than a human brain or human intelligence. The idea of that argument is, if we scale up this larger language model with much larger parameter space, someone argue is going to be larger than the parameter space of the human brain. I kind of wonder how there are so many brain and neuroscientists here. How do you estimate the parameter space of human brain? It's my curiosity. How did that argument even come about? If we build AI with large number of parameter space bigger than human brain, that's possible. How is that the parameter space of the human brain come up? How is that even estimated to start with?
Okay, I have a confession. I'm just a molecular biologist. So, Bill.
Well, there's 86 billion neurons, and in principle, there's many more combinations. And, for things like estimating parameter spaces, for example, the kinds of things people do is do dimensionality reduction and ask, like, what kinds of elements what do you find when you look for that? And you find, one of my colleagues at Rockefeller, Ali Pasha Vaziri, has recently done experiments where he recorded from 1 million neurons, not in a human brain, but in a mouse brain. And what he found is that as he kept increasing the number of neurons, the number of dimensions kept increasing. So it didn't saturate. It didn't have the kind of loss of information that you sometimes see statistically. So there are more parameters than expected, and there will be even more parameters in an 86 billion neuron brain. But I want to add one other element to that, which I think is really important, which is our superpower as humans is not what our individual brains can do, but our ability to do things collectively. It's the ability to transmit information to each other, so all of those parameters interact. And partly that's what the large language models are doing, are combining a lot of information from a lot of people, but at the moment in a not general way, but in a specific way. And I think that we don't even really know how to think about what you will add on to it with that additional information. So just to kind of throw that out there, I think, the power of language and the power of writing are the two things that have really set us apart and create whole new dimensions to what we can do.
I have a follow-up question, if you allow. The ChatGPT or large language model seem to show this probabilistic gradient descent is a way to achieve memory. Do you agree? What's your opinion how the human animal memory is formed?
We have to distinguish between different types of memory. We're talking short-term memory, working memory, long-term memory, verbal declarative memory, motor memory. But I think that the notion of attractors is a very important notion and very likely to be correct for some kinds of memory. So the idea that there are stable states, if you look at a collection of neurons interconnected with each other and look at their firing rates, they will find some set of firing rates at which they are stable. This is the principle of the hop field networks in computational neuroscience, and that is ideal for representing a memory. It's called an attractor basin, and you think about gradient descent into these basins, and that stable state in the basin is a memory. But you can think about a line attractor instead of a point being on a line, and that's suitable for memories that are analog distributed, like memories of the frequency of a sound that you just heard. And so I think that this whole thing of dynamical systems is going to hold a lot of promise and have a lot of sway in how we interpret brain dynamics in the future. This goes right back to the heart of the charge to Brain 1.0, which was to get a dynamical picture of how the brain operates. And I think it's coming. And I take those kinds of concepts seriously.
Thank you.
Okay.
It's not unanimous among my colleagues, by the way. But.
So one more questions between all of you and dinner and adult beverages. So please.
Thank you so much. I'm Helene Huang. I'm a biomedical engineering student at Johns Hopkins. First off, I'd love to thank all of you today for being here and taking the time to speak with us. My question is for Dr. Caroline, but I also want to open it up to the rest of the panelists. Dr. Caroline, you mentioned today that collaboration moves at the speed of trust, and I thought that was a very impactful statement. In your opinion, what are some ways for us to measure trust and its speed?
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you asking that question, and it's such an important one. So, in thinking about trust, I think that this applies very closely to the topics that we're discussing today around ethical and societal implications of science, because I think especially when it comes to engagement of patients and also thinking about the history of science and how it's been applied and used and disseminated in the world, I think we have a lot of examples where there has been a breakdown of trust due to different ways that populations have been engaged. And so I think when I think about trust, I think about it in a few different ways, some of them perhaps more practical than others. So thinking about collaboration within the BRAIN Initiative, for example, I think that building trust between different disciplines requires being able to speak to each other, sometimes in different languages, right? I think that that was one of the things that we noticed early on in the BRAIN Initiative, that a data scientist might be talking about impact of the data in a different way than a neuroscientist might. And so having a common language to translate sort of that, being able to switch codes in some way is really necessary, because then you're actually talking about the same concepts. I think in thinking about trust when it comes to those who are participating in research, especially patients, I think that a lot of the concepts circle around what's owed to those who are participating, or in the engagement session that Jen French and Ashley Feinsinger led earlier, thinking about what their role is, perhaps not even as participants, but as partners, was one of the proposals. And so I think that that aspect of crosstalk, as well as being able to have some shared goal between the two groups, is very important. And I think that that can also be applied in these patient settings, is thinking about what is valuable. And maybe one last thing I'll add here is also asking the question. So having the humility to ask the question, what is the goal of the other party, the other participant, the other collaborator that you're working with, so that you understand what you're trying to mutually achieve with whatever you're working on. So I recognize that that's a bit abstract, because I think about it in a lot of different levels, both cross-sectoral, really thinking about it in a lot of things that we do, cross-disciplinary, as well as in engagement with communities and people. But those are some sort of higher order principles that I think about trust, is having a common language, and also being able to ask a question about what you're both trying to achieve.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you. I want to thank you all for your engagement, your interest, and most of all for all that you have done and will do to make BRAIN just this amazing thing that we're doing. And please join me in thanking our great panelists for their insights and their inspiration for the future.